Chapter 19B. That night, Colin slept without once awakening, and when he opened his eyes in the morning, he lay still and he smiled without knowing it. He smiled because he felt so curiously comfortable. It was actually nice to be awake. He turned over and he stretched his limbs luxuriantly. He felt as if tight strings which had held him had loosened themselves and let go. He did not know that Dr. Craven would have said that his nerves had relaxed and rested themselves. Instead of lying and staring at the wall and wishing that he had not awakened, his mind was full of the plans he and Mary had made yesterday, of pictures of the garden and of Deacon and of his wild creatures. It was so nice to have things to think about, and he had not been awake more than 10 minutes when he heard feet running along the corridor, and Mary was at the door. The next minute she was in the room and had run across to his bed, bringing with her a warm waft of fresh air, full of the scent of the morning. "You've been out, you've been out. There's that nice smell of leaves about you," he cried. She had been running, and her hair was loose and blown, and she was bright with the air and pink-cheeked, though he could not see it. "Oh, it's so beautiful," she said, a little breathless with her speed. "You never saw anything so beautiful. It has come. I thought it had come the other morning, but it was only coming, and it is here now. It has come, the spring. Deacon says so." "Has it?" cried Colin, and though he really knew nothing about it, he felt his heart beat. He actually sat up in bed. "Open the window," he added, laughing, half with joyful excitement and half at his own fancy. "Perhaps we may hear golden trumpets." And though he laughed, Mary was at the window in a moment, and in a moment more it was opened wide, and freshness and scents and bird songs were pouring through. "That's fresh air," she said. "Lie on your back and draw in long breaths of it. That's what Deacon does when he's lying on the moor. He says he feels it in his veins and it makes him strong, and he feels as if he could live forever and ever. Breathe it and breathe it and breathe it." She was only repeating what Deacon had told her, but she caught Colin's fancy. "Forever and ever? Does it make him feel like this?" he said. And he did as she told him, drawing in long, deep breaths over and over again, and he felt that something quite new and delightful was happening to him. Mary was at his bedside again. "Things are crowding up out of the earth," she ran on in a hurry, "and there are flowers uncurling and buds on everything, and the green veil has covered nearly all of the gray. And the birds are in such a hurry about their nest building for fear they may be too late, and some of them are even fighting for places in the secret garden. And those rose bushes are as wick can be, and there are primroses in the lanes and woods, and the seeds we planted are up, and Deacon has brought the fox and the crow and the squirrels and a newborn baby lamb." And then she paused for breath. The newborn lamb Deacon had found 3 days before, lying by its dead mother among the gorse bushes on the moor. It was not the first motherless lamb he had found, and he knew what to do with it. He had taken it to the cottage and wrapped it in his jacket. He had let it lie near the fire and had fed it with warm milk. It was a soft thing, with a darling, silly baby face and legs rather long for its body. Deacon had carried it over the moor in his arms, and its feeding bottle was in his pocket with a squirrel. And when Mary had sat under a tree, with its limp warmness huddled in her lap, she had felt as if she were too full of strange joy to speak. A lamb, a living lamb who lay in your lap like a baby. She was describing it with great joy, and Colin was listening and drawing in long breaths of air when the nurse entered. She started a little at the sight of the open window. She had sat stifling in that room many a warm day because her patient was sure that open windows gave people colds. "Are you sure you're not chilly, Master Collins?" she inquired. "No," was the answer. "I am breathing long breaths of fresh air. It makes you strong. I am going to get up on the sofa for my breakfast. My cousin will have breakfast with me." The nurse went away, concealing a smile, to give the order for 2 breakfasts. She found the servants' hall a more amusing place than the invalid's chamber, and just now everybody wanted to hear the news from upstairs. There was quite a deal of joking about the unpopular young recluse who, as the cook said, had found his master and good for him. The servants' hall was very tired of the tantrum, and the butler, who was a man with a family, had more than once expressed his opinion that the invalid would be all the better for a good hiding. When Colin was on his sofa and the breakfast for 2 was put upon the table, he made an announcement to the nurse in his most Rajah-like manner. "A boy and a fox and a crow and 2 squirrels and a newborn lamb are coming to see me this morning. I want them brought upstairs as soon as they come," he said. "You're not to begin playing with the animals in the servants' hall and keep them there. I want them here." The nurse gave a slight gasp and tried to conceal it with a cough. Yes, sir," she answered. "I'll tell you what you can do," added Colin, waving his hand. "You can tell Martha to bring him here. The boy is Martha's brother. His name is Deacon, and he's an animal charmer." "I hope the animals won't bite, Master Colin," said the nurse. "I told you he's a charmer," said Colin austerely. "The charmer's animals never bite." "There are snake charmers in India," said Mary, "and they can put their snakes' heads into their mouths." "Goodness!" shuddered the nurse. They ate their breakfast with the morning air pouring in upon them. Colin's breakfast was a very good one, and Mary watched him with serious interest. "You'll begin to get fatter just as I did," she said. "I never wanted my breakfast when I was in India, and now I always want it." "I wanted mine this morning," said Colin. "Perhaps it was the fresh air. When do you think Deacon will come?" He was not long in coming. About 10 minutes later, Mary held up her hand. "Listen," she said. "Do you hear a call?" Colin listened, and he heard it. The oddest sound in the world to hear inside a house. A hoarse, "Call, call!" "Yes," he answered. "That's Soot," said Mary. "Listen again. Do you hear a bleat, a tiny one?" "Yes," cried Colin, quite flushing. "That's the newborn lamb," said Mary. "He's coming." Deacon's moorland boots were thick and clumsy, and though he tried to walk quietly, they made a clumping sound as he walked through the long corridors. Mary and Colin heard him marching, until he passed through the tapestry door and onto the soft carpet of Colin's own passage. "If you please, sir," announced Martha, opening the door. "If you please, sir, here is Deacon and his creatures." Deacon came in smiling his nicest wide smile. The newborn lamb was in his arms, and the little red fox trotted by his side. The squirrel Nut sat on his left shoulder, and Soot was on his right, and Shell's head and paws peeked out of his coat pocket. Colin slowly sat up and stared, as he had stared when he first saw Mary, but this was a stare of wonder and delight. The truth was that in spite of all he had heard, he had not in the least understood what this boy would be like, and that his fox and his crow and his squirrels and the lamb were so near to him, and his friendliness that they seemed almost to be part of himself. Colin had never talked to a boy in his life, and he was so overwhelmed by his own pleasure and curiosity that he did not even think of speaking. But Deacon did not feel in the least shy or awkward. He had not felt embarrassed because the crow had not known his language and had only stared and had not spoken to him the first time that they had met. Creatures were always like that until they found out about you. He walked over to Colin's sofa and he put the newborn lamb quietly on his lap. And immediately the little creature turned to the warm velvet dressing gown and began to nuzzle and nuzzle into the folds and butt its tight curled little head with soft impatience against his side. Of course, no boy could have helped speaking then. "What is it doing?" cried Colin. "What does it want?" "Well, it wants its mother," said Deacon, smiling more and more. "I brought it to thee a bit hungry because I know thou'd like to see it feed." He knelt down by the sofa and he took a feeding bottle from his pocket. "Come on, little un," he said, turning to the small, woolly white head with a gentle brown hand. "This is what thou's after. Thou'll get more out of this than thou will out of the silk velvet coats. There now." And he pushed the rubber tip of the bottle into the nuzzling mouth, and the lamb began to feed with ravenous intensity. After that, there was no wondering what to say. By the time the lamb fell asleep, questions poured forth, and Deacon answered them all. He told them how he had found the lamb just as the sun was rising 3 mornings ago. He'd been standing on the moor, listening to a skylark and watching him swing higher and higher into the sky until he was only a speck in the heights of blue. I'd almost lost him but for his song, and I was wondering how a chap could hear it when it seemed as if he'd gone into another world. And just then I heard something else far off, something among the gorse bushes. It was a weak bleating, and I knowed it was a new lamb, and it was hungry, and I knowed it wouldn't be hungry if it hadn't lost its mother somehow. So I set off searching. I did have to look for it. I went in and out among the gorse bushes and round and round. I always seemed to take the wrong turning, but at last I seed a bit of white by a rock on top of the moor, and as I climbed up, I found the little un, and he is half dead with cold and clemmy. While he talked, Soot flew solemnly in and out of the open window, and called remarks about the scenery, while Nut and Shell made excursions into the big trees outside, and ran up and down the trunks and explored the branches. Captain curled up near Deacon, who sat on the hearthrug from preference. They looked at the pictures in the gardening books, and Deacon knew all the flowers by their country names, and he knew exactly which ones were already growing in the secret garden. "I couldn't say that there name," he said, pointing to a long word under a picture, "but us calls that a columbine, and that there one is a snapdragon, and they both grow wild in the hedges. But these is garden ones, and they're bigger and grander. There's some big clumps of columbine in the garden. They look like a bed of blue and white butterflies a-fluttering when they're out." "I'm going to see them," said Colin. "I am going to see them." "Aye, that thou must," said Mary quite seriously, "and thou must not lose no time about it."